Chapter 8. Liza Lang tapped on the door and then entered the office. The smell of the rich coffee met Greybolt's nose. He grinned. "Good morning, sweetie." She smiled politely, set the cup on her boss's desk, and spun to make her escape. "Whoa, pony. Not so fast." Greybolt took a sip of the hot brew. Liza could tell he was in a good mood by the tie he wore. It was a bright red plaid with a gold tie clip. He normally wore gray. Liza promptly returned to Greybolt's side and waited. She wasn't in the mood for his bullshit as she stood there with a dutiful smile on her face. She thought about Arnie Smith. She had met with him for a drink last night. Arnie was a broken man. None of the prospective employers he had contacted had bothered to return his calls. He divulged he had never expected to be fired and was deeply in debt. He also mentioned that after he returned home, he read the employment contract that he had signed. It was airtight, and there was no way he could fight his termination or seek severance pay. Before leaving, Liza took 5 $100 bills from her purse. Arnie seemed hesitant to accept the charity but didn't resist when Liza pressed the bills into his hand. "You look magnificent today," Greybolt chirped. He stood up and circled around his assistant. He was checking her out as if he were purchasing a new cow for his ranch. Yes. Nice now. Let me see your tits." Liza untucked and unbuttoned her blouse. Her fake smile didn't change. He pushed up her bra, exposing her breast. "Come here," Greybolt said as he walked over to the huge plate glass window. Liza followed. He bent her forward, pressing her firmly against the glass. In a robust voice, he shouted, "Good morning, Las Vegas. Look up here and see the best damn titties in the city." He unzipped her skirt and let it drop to her feet. It didn't take Greybolt long to finish the deed. "Go freshen up. You can use my private bathroom," he said in a happy, satisfied voice. Liza smiled and winked. Once inside the restroom, Liza sat on the toilet, put her head in her hands, and cried. After showering and dressing, Liza pushed open the bathroom door. She was relieved to see that her boss was nowhere in sight. On his desk sat an envelope with her name scribbled on it. She picked it up as she walked by. It was thick with cash. Greybolt exited the elevator in the lobby. It didn't take him long to find Rizzer. "Good job last night." He handed his head of security 2 envelopes. "This one is for you. The other is for the crew." Rizzer placed the envelopes in the inside pocket of his sports coat. "So, did you hear any feedback from your friends downtown?" Greybolt asked. "Nope. There was a report of a disturbance. That's about it." "I have some prospective buyers coming to look at the property next week. Is the problem solved?" "I'm having the fencing around the property repaired and reinforced. I'm sure the word will get out about the little party we threw last night. Most of the indigents will stay clear." "Most? I don't want to see a single one of those filthy fucks on my property ever again." The jovial mood Greybolt had been in earlier disappeared. Rizzer detected the change and quickly came up with an idea. "We need to talk. Let's go back up to your office. I have a plan that will—" Before he could finish his sentence, his emergency beeper buzzed loudly and his phone rang. Greybolt didn't wait for Rizzer to finish the conversation. "What's happening?" "Arnie Smith is in the building and he has a gun." The scream was high-pitched and deranged. Both Greybolt and Rizzer turned toward the sound. Arnie rushed at them. His eyes were bloodshot. He had used the cash Carly had given him to buy a gun. He waved it wildly above his head. It took Rizzer seconds to pull out the Glock 22 from his shoulder holster. He stepped in front of Greybolt, shielding him from danger, and aimed his gun at Arnie. Arnie stopped immediately and trembled. He had never stared down the barrel of a gun before. He dropped his weapon. Rizzer pounced like a cat. The big man had Arnie down on the ground. He grabbed a handful of hair and pulled back on Arnie's head. He then glanced over at his boss. Greybolt nodded, and Rizzer slammed Arnie's face against the floor. Stars flashed before Arnie's eyes. Blood, drool, and tooth fragments oozed from Arnie's mouth, staining the white-polished marble flooring. When Arnie regained consciousness, he was home sprawled out on the floor of his bathroom. His gun was gone, and so were any ambitions of ever again confronting his ex-employer. Greybolt poured 2 glasses of scotch, one for Rizzer and one for himself. "You handled that situation incredibly well. No police, no hassles. You stepped up. That little asshole could have killed me." "Arnie doesn't have the balls to shoot you, but I could pay him a little reinforcement visit." Greybolt cons. Greybolt considered Rizzer's suggestion. Fuck him. I have bigger problems than Arnie Smith. We were talking about the bums camping out at the Green Gate. You said you had a plan. Rizzer left Greybolt's office and returned 15 minutes later. He carried a folder with the words Little Swan marked on it. He instructed Liza to make sure that there were to be no interruptions. Greybolt shifted uncomfortably in his chair. The Little Swan project made even someone as corrupted as Brian Greybolt skirmish. It had involved influencing politicians, judges, and other people who might be an asset in the enrichment of Greybolt enterprises. The island known as LS was uncharted and isolated. Its location was in international waters off the coast of Mexico. Greybolt purchased it many years ago. It could have been the perfect location for legitimate travelers who wanted absolute isolation from the modern world. Greybolt had other plans. He built a small casino and a brothel that was surrounded by private bungalows. Any person fortunate enough to receive an invitation to the island would have every desire fulfilled. The guests arrived via Greybolt's private jet, and if requested, they were greeted by escorts as young as 13 years old. Greybolt was pleasantly surprised to learn that a lot of men who stood as icons of morality in their communities were nothing more than petty perverts when presented with temptation. He was happy to keep the supply of young boys and girls flowing. He hired a special mistress whose job it was to recruit and groom. It wasn't unusual to see girls in their early teens walking around the island wearing high heels and lingerie, sometimes arm in arm with a congressman or mega church minister. In the meantime, Greybolt kept the secret cameras rolling. He had high expectations of blackmailing some of the most powerful men in the world. One morning, he received a call informing him that unknown assailants had raided the island. They had killed 3 of his security staff. Gunboats hauled away resort guests, employees, and surviving security officers. They remained hostages until Greybolt paid a hefty ransom. Mercenaries leveled the casino in the attack. They set fire to the bungalows and the brothel. Greybolt discovered that an Arab prince had financed the attack because he discovered his oldest son had spent time on the island. He demanded that Greybolt destroy any remaining videotapes of his son indulging in deviant behavior. Greybolt complied with the request. An attempt to rebuild a legitimate business failed when storms hit the island hard. Now all that remains of LS is a small landing strip and the rubble from the destroyed buildings that hadn't been swept out to sea. "Remember this place?" Rizzer asked. Greybolt grimaced. "I know, bad times," Rizzer added. "So why are you showing me this?" Greybolt asked. "I think it might solve our problem. If history is any indicator of future events, we will have at least a handful of die-hard squatters back at the Green Gate before the day is over. We can't kill them, but what if they just mysteriously disappear? It would send an obvious message." Greybolt pondered the words he had just heard. "So you are suggesting we round up the cockroaches and relocate them?" "That's right," Rizzer replied. "Wouldn't it be easier just to step on them? If something goes wrong, we can pull a few strings and beat a kidnap rap. Murder would be a lot more complicated. Why not just bust them to California? If we do that, the press would be on it in a minute. It's up to you, boss." Greybolt didn't need to stand up to see the Green Gate lurking behind him. He could feel its presence. "Work out the details and get back to me,"